Hi all, I have another very interesting game to show you from the Olympiad. Fabiano Caruana against Mamedyarov. This is from the USA versus Azerbaijan match. So board 1, e4 from Fabiano. We go into the Lopez, and in fact we go into the open Lopez, or sometimes called the Tarrasch defense of the Lopez. So here, d4, b5, this has all been seen before. D takes. In fact, we're following a game that Mamedyarov has played against Vichy Anand not so long ago. In fact, in St. Louis 2018. Knight c5, c3, bishop e7, bishop goes to c2, d4, knight b3, d3, bishop b1. Yeah, it seems as though Black's pawn is a little bit double-edged, isn't it? Slightly vulnerable. Well, after taking, Black protects that pawn now. Bishop e3, and White kind of tries to disconnect that pawn by using the d4 square here. So bishop d4 now. Queen d5. And now rook e1. d2. Rook e2, so this has all been seen before. Bishop takes b1, rook takes b1, knight takes. Yep. Now bishop g5 is played. If we look at this position, what is going on now with this pawn? Well, bishop g5 is important to hold the pawn before knight f3 arrives on the scene. So for example, if c5, knight f3, that rules out bishop g5, and this would just be a nice advantage for White, this position. So bishop g5 is important here and has been played against Vichy Anand by Mamedyarov. So we have g3. Okay, now why is g3 important? Well, sometimes f4 can be handy. If we look at knight f3 instead, then bishop f4, and g3 is actually impossible because of the knight being loose. Now, if knight takes d2 here, this position has a lot of pressure, and Black's getting the e5 pawn. So it has to be equal here. White's getting nothing out of the opening there. So g3 is played. c5 now. Now, if c5 isn't played, then it's going to be stopped, potentially, if rook a8, b4, stopping c5. And it's White that will have a nice position here, for example, like this. Even if c3 is undermined, this scenario, where d2 is collected, is good. The bishop's out of the game. Nice advantage for White. So c5 here. Knight f5. Clearly the knight can't go to f3, but if c2, this is very passive for White. And in fact, something like f4 introduces liabilities which White does not want. For example, like this position, you might think d2, but look, there's a loose rook on b1, and actually Black has bang, bishop takes f4 here, for example, with queen g6 taking b1. So yeah, there's a lot of unpleasant stuff on knight c2 which could happen. So knight f5 is played. We have queen d3. On queen f3, simply White plays knight d6, and there's a threat of rook takes d2 hitting the queen. So for example, this rook takes d2 wins that pawn with big advantage here with a knight on d6, octopus knight. So queen d3, staying out of trouble and putting pressure on the f5 knight. Knight d6, queen goes back to g6, keeping an eye on b1. So h4, we have bishop f4. Now, this varies finally from the Anand game. In the Anand game, Mamedyarov played bishop h6, and that was drawn at move 59. Actually, in fact, h5 was used, and then rook takes d2, clearing out that d2 pawn finally. Black took on e5, and the game carried on like this, and eventually it was drawn. So anyway, here we have bishop f4. Knight e4, and now f5, very aggressive looking move. So some interesting possibilities here. Yeah, Black's clinging on to the d2 pawn, not taking on e5, so with f5. Now let's see, on On e takes, this wasn't played actually. In fact, well, knight takes d2 was actually played here, but if e takes, then rook ae8 seems to be a good idea for black. This is good pressure. For example, h5 takes, rook takes d2, hitting the queen. This position is going to be even. There's nothing to write home about for white here in this rook and pawn ending. And here, let's have a look at something else. Say f takes g7. This is, I think, weaker slightly than h5. Black actually ends up, yeah, because of not being able to take it because of the rook, black ends up with bishop for a few pawns. But I think black has, yeah, it's a dynamically balanced position. So anyway, after f5, knight takes d2, rook a8. And now this is a very precisely calculated move which Fabiano spent quite a long time on, I think more than 20 minutes. It is a very, very tricky position indeed, because there's things like rook d3 as well. There's the queen eyeing b1 in some lines. It's a very, very difficult position, it seems to play. You have to play really accurately here with white. Now, as an example, say queen e1, which seems to tick a few boxes. It keeps d2 protected, it keeps g3 reinforced. Black has rook takes d2, bishop takes, and then f4, not only slicing g3 but hitting the rook, which shows this is potentially really unpleasant for white. But here, actually, white can survive to be equal, it seems, in this continuation. This is a long continuation example. It should be even there. Now let's just have a look. There's a variation on this variation. On f4, instead of rook d1. If check, then that does make things really difficult. Because of queen takes b1. No, that wasn't a very useful variation. Queen f1, just take on d2. Ruling out things here. So what does white do? Rook c1, there's rook d3. Anyway, it's a pin that way as well. Rook d3, and then bishop takes g3 is just a nightmare scenario where white's king is really in trouble, more than the e7 pawn is troublesome here. Yeah, it's just a nightmare position for white's king. So yeah, very, very precisely calculated move of the game so far. I think rook a1. We have rook f e8. So some choices here. If rook takes d2, this position with f4, there's check, and then queen takes c5, hitting the rook on f8. So if that has, the queen has to protect, then here, and we note here f2 is protected by the queen on c5. This should be a big advantage for white. So rook takes d2 in a nutshell isn't that great, it seems. Rook d3 is also not that great. Queen c2 seems to be the strongest move. On queen e1, this does allow stuff like bishop takes g3, which is a bit of a worry, but yeah, it is a bit of a worry, this kind of stuff. But white technically has a small edge, but it's scary stuff. So queen c2, let's imagine queen c2 here, bishop takes. This is going to be good for white. White's got nothing to worry about there. So anyway, so rook takes d2 wasn't played. So we have in fact rook f8, keeping a lot of tension, a lot of pins going. Look at the pressure that black's exerting. Queen e1, now I'm pinning at least this way and protecting g3 like that. Now bishop takes d2, rook takes d2. So there's no b1 rook to hit here now. Rook takes, queen takes, rook takes e5. Now we have check. Rook e8, check, queen e6, and now rook d1. Now here it seems, from my analysis, Mamedyarov could have suffered a miserable looking position here by playing just simply queen takes. It looks maybe in one respect as though it's an ideal endgame for white. I'll just show you this scenario, because white's taking on c5 and cutting the king off the 7th rank. However, it looks as though white's king's just going to walk on the dark squares somewhere. But concretely, if you look at this, let's say rook a2, king g2, how does white actually get into black's position? Is it that exploitable? Because what happens is a5 at this point, for example, and it looks as though this is really promising, but now just cutting the king with h6 to stop king g5, and it seems as though this could be potentially even, because there's things like this. Even if the king goes to f6, there's a check there, and it seems drawish. And if g takes, then taking here, this seems drawish as well, technically. But Mamedyarov perhaps didn't fancy the psychology of the position, having to play accurately, and plays c4, which improves any endgames now by okay, it's undoubling the pawns, but it's fixing b2. We have b takes c4, b takes c4, but now Caruana doesn't want a drawn rook and pawn ending. Yeah, with the p pawn fixed, he doesn't play this because it doesn't really offer anything. If we look at this, it doesn't offer anything. f4 with a nice fracturing pawn sack, and it's just dead even. So Caruana goes for it, keeps the tension with queen b7. Okay, so now we have rook e7, maybe, yeah, rook e7, rook d8 check, and now queen f3. So there's an idea of queen h5 now. The queen's pretty troublesome, and it's here black commits to some dark square weaknesses with g6. So yeah, it's not the king that's going to go around the dark squares, it's the queen that's trying to now in this scenario. So there's still some tension left in the position, queen rook against queen rook here. If h6, you might think, then rook d5 hits f5, provoking g6 anyway. This is just nice for white. This position is a much better rook and pawn ending, it seems, for white. On queen f3, if rook d7, just trying to not play any pawn moves, then check, and the king is actually in grave danger. You know, king e7 and there's rook e8 check, winning the queen. And if here the king's come out to play, potentially after rook f8 check, let's say queen f3, the king's out to play, and it's just nasty. White's getting a big advantage. And here if rook f7, for example, then rook e8 is a nice tactic. With the king on the e5, tactics like this exist, winning the queen. So yeah, all of a sudden in this rook and queen ending, it's not so drawn, it seems. There's chances for white to cause real problems now on dark squares for black's king. So a game of football has started, it seems, with white wanting to use black's king as a football now after queen f4 to go into h6. We have queen c6, which does threaten check and then mating on h1. So for example, if a casual move like this, then check and then mate here. So the rook comes back to defend the first rank first, waiting for that pleasure of queen h6. Rook e4, queen h6 now. Rook g8, now h5, which opens up, it's a critical attacking move, it opens up the h file, making that more dangerous. It vacates that h4 square, potentially for a rook swinging in later. We have rook e8. On queen e8, you might think that's logical. And in fact, though, even here, it might be the best move, but queen d2, this is tricky. After check, check, queen d8, white actually can install the dreaded form pawn. Yeah, so not just fracturing threats, but form pawn in this variation, which actually secures white an advantage. For example, like this is an example continuation. Form pawn's really dangerous here. So we have rook e8, and now hg, and now king f1. So the queen's protecting h1, otherwise that would be embarrassing. The king is now stepping out of a few dangers. giving black the move. Rook e6, queen h4, rook e8, rook d4, rook c8, pardon me, queen h6, queen e6. Yeah, now, yeah, there's fun to be had. If a5, then the rook swings to h4. So that whole h5 taking is given h4 for a rook now. For example, this line is just too dangerous. The black king is a football here, all of a sudden to be kicked around or winning material. So very, very dangerous. Queen e6, rook h4, king f7, check. Yeah, rook d4. There are big threats here now. We have queen e7, queen h6, king f7, queen d2 threatening rook d7. That's parry, but rook h4 threatening rook h7. Queen d4 check, queen b6 check, queen b8 threatening queen h8 now. And you can see the usefulness of the king being on f1. There's no back row check or anything. King f6, queen h8 check, queen g8 check, and now rook d4. So the threats never end here. It's really difficult to play. Queen e7, rook d8, threatening horrible things. And in fact, after king g5, the black king is in big trouble now after f4 check. Black's busted here. On king h5 was played. On king g4, just simply taking g6, and then rook here is very dangerous. For example, queen e3, there's check here, and then check here, and then rook g2, and then rook g3, winning the queen. So king h5 was played. There's no benefit in plunging forward the king, it seems. Rook d2, threatening rook h2. Well, there's big threats now. Queen g7, rook h2 check, and now a big point here. Can you guess what white plays in this position? If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video, white's play. Okay, nice move. King g2 threatening rook h4 checkmate. So black's busted. g5 was played. Yeah, let's put that on the board to see it. This mate. So g5 was played, but now the weaknesses of that last move tapped into with queen e8 threatening queen h5 checkmate, or queen e2 checkmate. Either way, it's checkmate next move. So queen g6, queen e2. Yeah, black had to resign in this position after queen e8. g6, then we play queen here, for example. Yep. So a very, very interesting game. Mamedyarov, following his Vichy Anand stem game for quite some time, innovation move bishop f4. Later on, it seems as though the endgame, although miserable looking, might have been the best way to play it to avoid any potential issues. If one wanted to draw with the black pieces, it seems the rook and pawn endings, there's this quotation, all rook and pawn endings are drawn, an exaggeration. But maybe, even though it's miserable looking, it was a bit drawish, it seems, technically, even though white's king and the rook on the 7th is a dream, but not enough. But it was better than suffering this position where the queen and rook were coordinating against black's king. But that attack was difficult to estimate, because at some point h5 was used with the threat of the pawn pawn, or just taking to get that h4 square for a rook swing. So the attack was difficult to estimate, really, and became a difficult position for black's king safety. So a very, very interesting game from Fabiano Caruana. So he's going to be a fantastic challenger, I believe, for Magnus Carlsen later in this year. So I hope you're looking forward to the World Championship match as much as me. I think we're in for a treat. Okay, comments, questions, likes, shares appreciated. Thanks so much.